Okay, so it seems like every single year we have this debate. Is Texas going blue? Are things going to flip? Is this the end of the GOP? Blah, 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 blah. But it never seems to transpire. It seems like it never actually ends up happening. But this time around, guys, there's a real chance of Texas going blue. And even if it doesn't actually go blue, it's seriously and legitimately competitive this time around in a way that we haven't seen in decades. In my entire lifetime, I've never seen anything like this. This is a massive and really big deal. So let's take a look at this data, and then we're going to sort of break it down and talk a little bit about what's going on and whether or not this kind of thing is likely to continue. So you can see here, during the course of this coronavirus pandemic, if you sort of split it up for the duration of the coronavirus, you can see here the poll numbers for Joe Biden and Donald Trump significantly tightening up. I mean, just massively tightening up since March all the way to now, where here at the end here, I mean, you can see for the first time in the past couple of weeks in this polling aggregator, again, this is an, I don't know if I said that actually, but this is an aggregator aggregating a bunch of different polls together. In the aggregate, Joe Biden having a 0.1 lead. Now, obviously 0.1, I mean, the margin of error, everything, caveats, etc. But I mean, you can take that here and also be honest in looking at that and being like, that's still a really big deal. That's really significant. Hillary Clinton last time around, a lot of people were running around praising Hillary Clinton because she managed to bring Texas in to single-digit margins for the first time. Texas into single-digit margins for the first time since the 1990s, in like 2.5 decades. But she still got absolutely trounced in Texas, losing by 9 points, right? But this is a situation right now where Joe Biden has a real chance of taking Texas, or at least making Texas competitive. And we also need to understand that when it comes to Texas polling, right, like, because there's this debate when it came to the polling last time around that the polls were inaccurate, etc. And they were off by maybe a few percentage points within the margin of error. Although, when it comes to these general polling right now, nationwide, we also have to be realistic and understand that right now Joe Biden's leading by like 10 points. We haven't seen anything like that. But when it came to Texas specifically, Democrats have outperformed their polls in Texas. They've outperformed them both in 2016 and in 2018. Last time around. So, Texas is a little bit of a different story than some of the other states that we've seen across the country. Texas is actually easier to poll as well compared to some of the other states because there's a lot, Texas has a more educated voter base. It's one of the more educated states. In fact, it's the most educated state that Donald Trump won in 2016. So that's a pretty big deal, obviously, very important thing to understand. But Texas is, again, more easy to poll. And as a result, polls for Texas are actually a little bit more accurate than polls for maybe other states. And that's really important, something super important to understand. And again, this is a general trend that we've been seeing. Beto O'Rourke, for instance, losing to Ted Cruz by only 3 points around, last time around. But what we've got to talk about here is Donald Trump's campaign strategy and how they're trying to move things forward. So I want to just sort of play this out for you guys, and we'll watch it together here sort of while I talk over it. But you can see, this general idea that that the Donald Trump campaign is trying to run with. I mean, this is the ad that the Donald Trump campaign put out. And I mean, you can see there, and I'm not going to lie, the first time I saw this, I was kind of laughing here because it's just so preposterous and so ridiculous. But the idea that the Donald Trump campaign is trying to run with is, as you can see, pretty obvious, that Joe Biden is a Trojan horse, that Joe Biden is just, a vessel there for the far left to come and infiltrate and take over the country. I'll tell you what, I wish that were the case. It's not the case, though. But I'll tell you what, I do wish that were the case. Nonetheless, though, we do need to understand that when it comes to understanding the election right now, right? Because Donald Trump's campaign, they're looking at the data right now and they're worried. And so what they're trying to do is convince voters that actually you can't go out and vote for Donald Trump, because clearly, they poll tested that, right? Like, this is a campaign and they poll tested that. And so one of the things that they are worried about, because again, they put out that ad, is that they are worried about voters who, may typically vote Republican thinking about switching over to vote for Joe Biden. And so the way in which they're trying to negate that is by convincing that specific block of voters, you can't do that. You can't do that because if you do that, you're just enabling the far left. And, if you see it not particularly in this in that particular video, but in other campaign rhetoric and other videos that we've seen, they try to link it to this idea of basement Biden, to dementia. And that's something that I've talked about on this channel. I mean, it's definitely just a fact. I mean, you can deny it all you want, but it's a fact. If you watch videos of Joe Biden right now and then compare them to videos of Joe Biden like 2 or 3 decades ago, he is not in any way nearly as coherent as he used to be. Policies aside for just a second here, which I've also been very, very critical of. Joe Biden used to be able to put his sentences together much more authoritatively, used to speak much more authoritatively than he does right now. And Donald Trump's campaign is really trying to capitalize on that, making it this idea that, oh, well, he can't really put his sentences together. He has a kind of dementia that, he isn't really a leader in the way that maybe he used to be. He isn't how you really remember him, maybe when you were younger. And so as a result, he's just going to be pulled by the forces of the party. He's just going to be pulled by the forces of the party, which they seem to think are the far left, the AOC, Ilhan Omar, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I don't agree with that. I'll tell you what, I wish that were the case. But that's the sort of strategy that the Donald Trump campaign is trying to run with. And I think it really does tell us a lot about what the Donald Trump campaign is worried about. Because again, this isn't necessarily Donald Trump doing that, because you might hear that and be like, well, Donald Trump is stupid, you can't extract too much from it, et cetera, et cetera. But Donald Trump does pay a lot of people who are very educated and who know how to read poll data, even if, we disagree with them entirely in terms of policy. They know how to look at the numbers, they know how to look at the data, and they're trying to craft an argument which they think could win them the election. So I think it really does tell us a lot, and it is very informative when it comes to even a state, and especially, I should say, a state like Texas. Again, I've been talking about the trends of Texas over the past couple years. The Democratic candidates for Attorney General and for Lieutenant Governor finished within 5 points of the Republican Party, of the Republican opponent last time around. Again, still losing, but that trend is clear. That trend is very, very clear. Now, one serious weakness when it comes to Texas for Joe Biden is his weakness among Hispanic voters. Now, he is still winning, obviously, Hispanic voters by a massive margin against Donald Trump, but it is weaker, and Joe Biden does see a loss relative to Hillary Clinton last time around. Now, obviously, Bernie Sanders was strong with that community in the primary election. It's unclear whether or not, that's related to it or what the factor is, but that is one data point which we are seeing, and that could be a weakness for him, especially when it comes to Texas, where Joe Biden seems to be underperforming even Hillary Clinton last time around compared to 2016. And again, when we talk about Texas falling to the Democratic Party, when it comes to Texas, to use the dramatic term that the Republicans would use, when it comes to Texas flipping blue, when it comes to the GOP losing Texas, we are talking about a situation where Republicans probably won't be able to win the presidency, at least very easily at all. I mean, what is it, 38 electoral points? I mean, if the GOP, if Republicans don't have Texas in their belt, if they don't have Texas in their bag, they probably can't win the presidency. They might and probably will be able to win possibly the Senate and maybe even the House, but they're probably not going to be able to win the presidency, at least for a very long time, and at least without, flipping other states back red. Maybe they'll have some luck in Wisconsin. We saw Wisconsin, of course, last time around in 2016, longtime blue state flipping red. Is that a long-term trend? We'll have to see. Right? We'll have to see when it comes to Wisconsin. But my point here is this. This is a major shift in the way in which politics have played out in the past couple decades. And this goes to a general trend. I mentioned education earlier when it came to Texas. A general trend that we've been seeing is that more educated voters are becoming more and more likely to vote Democratic. And that's really switching things up, especially when it comes to Texas, where the suburbs, specifically the well-educated suburbs, are really the thing which is really flipping around to the Democratic Party. It's the educated suburbs. Some of that, of course, is from moving. We saw, for instance, for a long time there, the most popular U-Haul route was from San Francisco to, I think, Austin or some city in Texas. So, there's a lot of people from blue states moving into Texas right now. So that's some of it. But also, just in general, it does reflect the nationwide trend of more educated voters being more likely to vote Democratic, and Texas becoming a more and more educated state over the past couple years. And that's really significant if we want to understand the long-term thing of this. And going to the general macro macro level of this, I was sort of alluding to this earlier, you know, this could be a situation where we end up with a major dominant party, the Democratic Party, and an underdog party like the Republican Party in the long run. And you might think that that's absurd. Well, things are going to balance out. Not necessarily. In fact, actually, if you go through, like literally just go through the history of this country, there were very, very long periods of time. In fact, the majority of the time for the history of this country where you have one major party and then you have a sort of minor party, and that major party basically dominates politics, and then you have a minor party which still does, you know, exert a kind of influence on that major party. That's the general history of this country. It just is. Competitive elections really only started occurring around the 70s, around the 80s, and that's when, you know, especially after kind of Ronald Reagan, that's when competitive elections started to really creep in and started to come in. So in some respects, we're in an odd time right now. We're in an odd time right now, and so it's quite possible. And, you know, again, right, like at this point, we are speculating here, obviously. But it is possible that we could be looking at a situation where, you know, the Democratic Party is the major party, and then you have this minor party in the Republican Party. And I do believe, by the way, that that is going to increase the importance of primary challengers to Democrats in Congress, right? Like, how would you actually flip a seat? How would you actually move things further without actually challenging people within your own party? So that's going to, you know, that's another debate though, right? Like that's another discussion. That's another conversation. But nonetheless, though, I do think that there is a real possibility, again, possibility, that we could be looking at a situation where we're going to return to the normal situation of American politics, where you have a major party and then you have a minor party. And who knows? That could be really, really interesting. Some people say that that's going to be worse. Some people, such as Francis Lee, a political scientist at the University of Maryland, thinks that that's actually a better system for the way in which our governance system works, that we'll have, you know, sort of less polarization. We'll have just a better way, a better ability to pass legislation and pass rules if you end up in a situation where that minor party knows that they know that they're not going to win the presidency next time around, and so they end up being more likely to actually engage in sort of compromise and dialogue and working with the major party in order to get things done. Whereas in our current system, Francis Lee argues, again, you know, this is another person making this argument, but Francis Lee argues that in our current system, the Republican Party, such as, you know, Mitch McConnell, has absolutely no incentive to ever compromise on the Democratic Party, because they know, well, hey, look, in a few years, we're going to be in office again. So every single incentive, she argues, is basically to obstruction. Now, you know, some of that stuff is just speculation, and it's hard to tell exactly, you know, how that stuff actually works out. But nonetheless, though, I do think that it does merit us to consider that, you know, a situation where there is a major party and a minor party isn't necessarily terrifying. Again, it's the general situation that America has found itself in throughout its history. And then that's, you know, sometimes it'll flip. There'll be, you know, that sometimes this party is the major party, and then the other, you know. So we'll have to see how it plays out. It's very interesting. It's very, very interesting. And anyway, that's the video. So I wanted to update you guys on that, tell you a little bit about Texas, and talk about whether or not this thing is going to be long-term. Let me know what you think about it. Is this going to be a long-term thing that Texas ends up flipping blue, or will things start to move back to the Republican Party? All right, you guys, if you like this video, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.